Welcome to AskPsychSessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. If you have a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. All one word, all lowercase. And here's our next question.
Thank you for joining us. My guest today is Dr. Melissa Lehman from Lynn University. I'm glad you're here today, Melissa.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Before we get started, as usual, I like for listeners to know a bit about the guest. So can you tell us about Lynn University, starting with, where is Lynn University? I Googled it, but it was a new university to me. What are you teaching? What is your research training? What are your students like? Anything that you think will help set the context for today, please.
All right, great. So Lynn University is a small college in Boca Raton, Florida. We have about 750 new undergraduates each year, and then several hundred graduate students each year. And we are growing and growing, so getting a little bit bigger each year as well. In our psychology program, we have a large number of psychology majors. It's actually the largest major in our college. So I'm teaching primarily psychology students, although we also have a lot of students who take our psychology classes as electives. So they come from all over the university. We get business majors. We get other arts and sciences majors in my classes as well. And a little bit about me, my background is in cognitive psychology, specifically in learning and memory. I got my PhD from the University of South Florida, and after that, I did some postdoctoral research at Purdue University, working with Jeff Karpicki, looking at retrieval practice and the effectiveness and mechanisms behind retrieval practice as a learning strategy. So I try to apply that now in my coursework and also continue to do a little bit of research in that area.
Great, thank you. So it does sound like you're at a teaching-oriented institution as opposed to Purdue or South Florida.
Yes, definitely teaching-oriented.
Great. No 1-1 course load, I'm guessing more 3-3
No.
4-4.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, and that's, sort of what classes are you teaching
right
now or regularly?
I teach cognitive psychology. I also teach cross-cultural psychology at the undergraduate level. At the graduate level, a similar class called Social and Cultural Foundations in Psychology. I also teach a graduate class called Teaching and Training in Psychology, which is a really fun class where we get to kind of apply content from psychology and other fields such as consulting and help students kind of prepare for careers in the field of psychology. Those may be careers that involve teaching, or they may not be. So we also look at training. So they might be running training programs in their jobs. So it's kind of a choose your own adventure type of course where it gets tailored toward their interests. I teach a few other classes as well, like career prep in psychology for undergrads.
All right, great. Well, I have lots of questions about those, but we're going to wait to get to them so that I actually do what I promised, which is to ask you about why I asked you to come on the podcast, which is you're part of a series of guests who all are, congratulations, recipients of STP, the Society for Teaching of Psychology's Instructional Resource Grants this year. And yours is titled The Psychological Myth Project, Research and Application. So would you tell us a little bit about what the grant is going to do, and then maybe a little bit about what you're already doing in this space?
So in terms of my project, I'm going to be developing a teaching resource related to this project. So I started a kind of smaller version of this project in one of my classes. And it's basically a sort of myth-busting project. So students are working in groups and looking at a myth within psychology. I started this in my cognitive psychology class. So they are looking at a myth within cognitive psychology, which we've got a whole bunch of different myths that they can choose from. Something like using a hands-free cell phone is a safe alternative to holding a cell phone while driving, or other myths like people only use 10% of their brains. So they do a project where their job is to kind of evaluate the veracity of the myth. So they have to look at the research and see how wrong is this myth. So I kind of start off by telling them, some of these things might be partially true, some of them might be totally false, and it's really your job to figure out what's the story here. And we've been doing that project, and I've been really happy with the results. So the students are doing a great job of looking at the research and comparing that to kind of what the public believes about this myth. So I've started to expand that into a semester-long project. And as I'm doing that, I've been thinking about how this could be more broadly applied. It's something that really can work in any course within psychology, really, because there are so many myths. And reviewing some of the research, I've been seeing, there are like books that talk about 200 different myths in psychology. And so there's a lot of potential out there for that. And then, so I also have, I teach this class in different formats. I teach it online. I teach it in person. I teach a hybrid version, which is partly online. And so I'm adapting the project to all of these different formats. And so it's really, it's a semester-long project, but it's really adaptable to different class formats, different topics within psychology. So I thought it would be really nice for this a really nice teaching resource that I could share. In addition to that, at Lynn, we have a really strong focus on scientific literacy and information literacy. So I'm planning to assess how students improve on some of those things throughout the course. So I will hopefully be able to collect some data that I can publish on this as well. So it's kind of a twofold plan here to publish the teaching resource in addition to data looking at the effectiveness of this project on information literacy, critical thinking skills, in addition to content knowledge in that area.
That sounds terrific. I'm going to ask a question that you may not have a ready answer for, but when I think about a project like this, about what would make me maybe sad, and I know we shouldn't base our choices on emotions, but some of these myths I think people feel very attached to, right? As someone who's trying to kill the learning styles myth, students it feels difficult. So my question is, have you run into this sort of resistance piece that's happening? That is sort of part A, and then part B, since you confess that you teach cultural psych, I'm curious if any of these myths, part of the sort of holdup places where it's partially true, has to do with the fact that some of these myths, the debunking has only come from a very narrow lens of who's in the studies that are debunking the myths. So if you want to take either of those pieces or both.
Yeah, so those are great questions. So regarding your first question, it's funny that you mentioned the learning styles myth because we've given a quick survey to students and also asked the students to share this survey with friends and family. And this is something that's going to become part of this project and part of the data that we're hoping to eventually publish. But one of the things that we found is that the learning styles myth was like the most believed myth, with 96% or something of people believing that it's true. And I found that one in particular, my students would search for the research, and unfortunately there's a lot of research out there in some of the education journals that actually supports the learning styles myth. And so they would really be kind of searching for research that confirms their existing belief. So I struggled with that one in particular, and I stopped assigning that as a myth. And instead, I started using that as my example. So now we use the learning styles myth as the example that I work through for each step of my instructions. But yeah, I think that the learning styles myth in particular is so persistent because it feels relatable. Students are like, I tell them I'm a visual person, right? So I prefer to see things visually if I'm trying to learn something. And I think they automatically just kind of latch on to whatever that is and think like, this is the only way I can learn. One thing that I find is really helpful in kind of this debunking process is we talk about what are the problems? Why does it matter if this myth exists? And it gets students thinking about how, for this myth in particular, if you believe that there's only one way you can learn, that's going to be really limiting. And it's going to, you're going to lose motivation if you're trying to learn in a different way. And I think doing that can help students kind of detach themselves from the myths a little bit. So I have seen some promise in that respect. If we really think about like, why is it a problem that these myths exist? Then that kind of helps with that critical thinking piece, which also helps with that kind of emotional attachment that students can have to the myth. And I also talk about things like when we talk about cell phones and driving, for example, there's some cognitive dissonance there. So if you find out that, hands-free devices aren't actually any safer, but you've got Bluetooth in your car and this is how you make all your calls when you're driving, you might not want to believe that myth because of that dissonance. And so we kind of try to spend a little bit of time working through that as well. I confess that even though I know this research, that doesn't mean I never use my cell phone while driving. I try to limit it because of what I know, but sometimes it's unavoidable, or try to connect with students in that way. And we're kind of not all expected to be perfect here, but we can take this knowledge and make small changes based on that. And I think they connect with that as well. I haven't expanded this beyond my cognitive psych class yet. So in terms of looking at this from the kind of cultural perspective, I haven't thought a lot about that, but I think that's actually a really interesting idea. And that could be kind of one potential avenue where I could go in the future. So kind of connecting this to culture, and we know that culture, we internalize our culture so much. So how that might relate to people's connections to these myths, I think is a really interesting question.
Great. Thank you. Lots to think about. Myths, and do you want to bust them? And I love how you had dealt with the learning styles. Like, you're not going to escape this information.
Right.
But I'm not going to I'm not going to let you go in deep and have to undo, because that's, again, it's a hard one to undo. And if you just did it in cog psych, then probably you haven't also done an astrology busting myth, which is another one where I feel like students, it's very difficult for me to convince them that it's fun.
Yeah.
You can have some level of like affinity. Mm-hmm. But I don't grant extensions in my classes because I'm a Pisces. I do it because I think it's the right way to teach, right? All right. Well, we are coming up on our sort of, length of time. We try to keep these episodes, but I do like to let my guests have some say in what they want to share. So is there something else either about this or about other things that you think our listeners, who are primarily people interested in improving their own teaching, would like to hear?
That's a great question. So yeah, you mentioned that you wanted to hear more about some of those other classes. Is there anything in particular that you think the listeners might be interested in hearing more about?
I'm going to assume that they would like to hear about careers, and that's selfishly what I would like to hear about. That's something we've been talking about in our department. Students are asking for more information about potential careers in psych, more information about how they access those or figure them out. So maybe if you could give kind of the top 3 things that happen in a psychic careers class, that'd be great.
So this class, actually, it ends up also being a kind of choose your own adventure course, because we have a lot of students that are interested in going into careers as soon as they finish. But we also have a lot of students that want to go to graduate school. So we've kind of divided the class, and they can pick which route they want to take. And it ends up being a kind of a practical application course where they plan out some application materials. So if they're applying for jobs, they work on a cover letter. If they're applying to grad school, they work on a personal statement. And we kind of develop these as we go. But we start the class with a lot of brainstorming. And we were inspired by Stanford's Design Your Life program, which basically looks at kind of making decisions like career decisions from a designer's perspective. And so there's a lot of brainstorming involved there, and a lot of kind of activities to really think about all of the different things that might be important in a career. So we use some of the free online resources like ONET to look at different career options for students, but we really spend the first week or first few weeks in the class kind of trying to expand and come up with as many options as possible, and then later kind of narrowing those options to the ones that we like best. So we also think about, we have students kind of think about what are some of their limitations. So for example, a lot of times students are thinking about jobs and careers and what they might want to do, and not really thinking about the things that might limit them in terms of, location or family pressures or these types of things. So we try to kind of get everything out on the table in front of you in the beginning of this class. And then we start thinking about what are some of the ideas that we have for jobs and how might they fit in with some of those limitations. Or same thing for grad school, if you're interested in going to a graduate program. What are the limitations that you're going to be working with, and which of those are kind of hard limitations that you can't change, and what are some of the things that you might want to consider? Is this going to limit me so much that I'm not getting what I want, and is this something that I really need to set a limit right now at this point? So that's kind of how the beginning of the class is structured. We end up actually having more than half of the students, probably about 75% of the students, end up working on the grad school types of activities. And we do have a lot of students that apply to grad school. And then not all of them get into grad school. So we also leave the course. I give them access to all of the materials. And I also sort of follow up with them in a kind of mentoring role after they complete the program. Because a lot of them, they might take this class in the fall, but then in the spring, they're actually applying for jobs. So I'll follow up with them in the spring, share some of the materials that they kind of skipped over maybe in the fall that might help them with their job applications later on. But really, in terms of choosing career paths, we tend to use a lot of the free online resources that we can find. We do assessments, so that they can identify, what are their strengths and interests, and try to match those to some career options. I think that ONET is probably my favorite resource for that. And yeah, we kind of just go from there.
That sounds like a really good class, and I'm going to borrow some of that for my 1-credit orientation to the psych major class
Sure.
for fall semester. So thank you. And thank you also for that reminder that we need to look at students as whole people, and that there are going to be factors that are going to be different student to student, and we shouldn't just try to ignore those or convince them to change them, right? We need to work with them. So thank you for that reminder as well. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today. I have been chatting with Dr. Melissa Lehman from Lynn University. Listeners, did today's episode make you realize you have a question you would like someone to answer? I would be happy to take it into consideration and find a guest that can help. But what I need you to do is head over to our Google form at bit.ly/AskPsychSessions.